Prior to my becoming an Anglican, which I did in my early 30s, I believe, I attended a Baptist church. And there are a number of differences, as you can imagine, far fewer what we might call rituals. It felt a little bit more casual. We only served communion once a month. There were no formal repeated prayers that you might hear week after week. And there certainly was a power structure to the leadership, although it wasn't as easy to spot as in an Anglican church with its priests and bishops. So when I moved to Northern Ireland to do ministry there, one of the best things about it was that I was able to work with a lot of different people from a lot of different denominations. I got to work with so many kinds of churches that I was unfamiliar with. Most of my colleagues were Protestant, and many of us became fascinated with going to Catholic Mass because it was so different from what we were used to, and the novelty of it was quite inspiring. Something we learned early on as visitors was that if we went to Mass, we were not to take communion because we were not confirmed in the church. And even when we disagreed about the theology, we were not interested in offending anybody. Of course, soon enough, we learned of the tradition of asking for a blessing in place of taking the bread. And different ones of us became brave enough to go up and ask for one with varying results. Sometimes we were offered mumbled blessings that were barely audible behind a quick wave of the priest's hand. There was even one awkward incident that I can recall, thankfully something that happened to someone else. My friend, his arms folded clearly across his chest, approached the priest in a little country parish, and when he asked for a blessing instead of the bread, the priest sort of hesitated for a moment, like he didn't really know what was going on, a look of confusion on his face. This is clearly not something that happened very often, someone not taking the bread and asking for a blessing instead. And the priest apparently just carefully put the wafer straight into my friend's mouth. I am happy to report no one was struck by lightning. And I remember the first time that I was brave enough to ask for a blessing. I was working with a very warm and kind priest over a few days, running a retreat program for a group of Catholic school kids. And as we set up the room for Mass, I asked the priest if it wouldn't be too disruptive for me and my Protestant colleague to come for a blessing during communion, and his face lit right up, and he said, "Of course, I would love to bless you." And I'm not sure why I was so surprised by the enthusiasm. I suppose it often felt like I didn't quite belong. I was a Protestant and a foreigner. Even in the community of international volunteers where I lived, it was mostly Americans. I often felt out of place, for better or worse. And so to have my humble request for a blessing met with more than just priestly duty or rote words, well, his enthusiasm was a blessing to me in and of itself. The term blessing is one that we might take for granted, I think, here in the church. We're people who come to church almost every week. And it's kind of, as adults anyway, it's just a given that we understand it, but I wonder how often we really stop to consider its meaning. A few months ago, some of you may notice that I disappear at the beginning of the service to go and sing with the kids in Sunday school. And a few months ago, Frida and I taught the kids to sing the Teze song, "Bless the Lord, my soul." And by way of introduction, Frida explained to them that to bless means to speak a desire for good things for someone. I think even some of the adults in the room found themselves surprised to realize they hadn't really thought about it before, and how lovely that is. I think it's good to have a moment to just think these things through, ruminate a bit. A reminder can snap us out of the autopilot that we can often fall into when it comes to terminology that we use on a regular basis. And there's a reason that we use the words bless and blessing and blessed as often as we do. I know that I often want good things for so many people that I speak with, especially here at church. I think here at Transfig, I find that we are committed, and enthusiastic community. We love to support each other. We love to keep connected on what is going on in one another's lives. Our desire for good to happen to one another is very clear. In fact, I think our desire to bless each other goes even further than just what we say. I often think back to those early days of the pandemic lockdown. I wrote an email that went out to the community in which I urged people to stay connected and to reach out, send an email, make a phone call to whoever came to mind. One of the things I specifically recommended was that needs be shared, especially with the staff here at the church. What is our work as staff if not to support and connect with people in a time of need? And with everything that was going on, the loss of work and income that was so prevalent, I wanted people to communicate if they were having trouble making rent or getting groceries. With all of the strange new work habits that we had to adopt, the adaptation of our home spaces, even the isolation that some of us found ourselves in. With all of that, the potential for stress and anxiety was so great that it was important for us to share it all with one another so that we would know where the support was most needed. I got a lot of responses to that email. What was funny is that they were all from people who were offering support. There were so many people excited to offer their time and their resources to anyone who might need it. Another example of enthusiasm to bless that blesses me just by being privy to it, even before any action has happened. Today we are reflecting on this famous passage, the Beatitudes, a passage full of blessings. Jesus is surrounded by crowds of people, and I can imagine him looking around at them, taking them all in, all the individual faces, intuiting their lives and their struggles from simple features, laugh lines, furrowed brows, the labored movement that some moved with, and the urgency with which others moved. I know he perceived a sea of people with various and vast experiences. And rather than presuming any struggles were a result of shortcomings, Jesus had compassion and he longed for good things for each of them. A perfect place to begin his teaching. He begins to move up the mountain just far enough away from the crowd that he can be heard, and beckoning his followers to join him, he sits like a teacher should, and even like a king does when making a decree. He sits and begins to teach by naming all the people that he can think of who he genuinely and enthusiastically wishes to bless. He seems to be naming two groups of people. One group is full of people in need, the meek, the mourning, the poor in spirit, the persecuted, the reviled, people who could use some relief, some good news, people who have lost a lot, people who are ready for a different system than the one that has worn them down, people in need of the kingdom that Jesus has come to reveal. And the second group that he names are those in whom he sees behaviors that demonstrate an intimate knowledge of God's kingdom. The merciful, the peacemakers, the pure in heart, people who seem to know something about God's desire for justice and compassion. These are people that he can count on to help show the power of kindness and service, who are helping to clear the way for his kingdom by undermining social norms that discount a person's inherent dignity or exploit somebody's weakness. Instead of stepping over those who have fallen, these kingdom-type people will give up their chance to cross the finish line first and instead stoop to help the fallen to their feet. It is powerful when we find ourselves among those in this second group of blessed people, to be compassionate and forgiving, to presume the best in people, to seek peace by listening and not by judging. And it's hard work to do any of these things. So hard that Jesus names these behaviors specifically as godlike, Yahweh-like, heavenly, earth-shattering. It is good to put all our efforts into being these kinds of people. But I think it's important to also remember that Jesus refers to the first group, to those who are in need, as equally blessed. We need to remember this when we ourselves are in need. It helps to take the sting out of the fear of vulnerability. So many of us have a hard time opening up about what we need. When we have feelings of anxiousness, when we are not confident that we're doing a good enough job, even when we're in pain because of loss or grief, how many of us try to gloss over these burdens that we carry or try to downplay when we are in need of relief or support? Somehow we have convinced ourselves that it is better to put on a brave face lest we burden someone else, lest we be seen as weak or struggling. If any of this is sounding familiar, please remember that there is much more compassion available to you than you probably realize. If you are someone who would go the distance for someone in need without judgment or condition, why do you think you should not be afforded that same unconditional love and support? The truth of the matter is, I think that each of us belongs to both camps of who Jesus calls blessed. It is just so much easier to accept a blessing we feel we've earned by doing something noble or righteous. But we do not earn a place in the kingdom. It is made with plenty of room for each of us, built right in. And so even when you are struggling, no matter what the hardship is, no matter how meek or wounded or scared or tired or unsure you are, the kingdom is yours. You shall see God. If we are doing it right, the kingdom is this big group of people who are supporting each other back and forth, seeing the beauty and belovedness that God has placed in each one of us, giving when we can give, and accepting when we need to. There's no rating, no reviling, no judging, just meeting each other where we are at. This sounds like a revolution when you start thinking about it. It's a revolution of unconditional love that allows God to be experienced in this tender and fragile realm in which we live. And let me say it again, it is unconditional love that God offers. You do not earn this love, this blessedness, this goodwill from God. It is offered with excitement. All you have to do is accept it. So please, do not shy away from God's enthusiastic desire to bless you, because if you want to belong to it, the kingdom of God is yours. Amen.